Hello and welcome to this week's Forest Friday. My name is James Steves and I will be hosting the session this week. And I am very excited because we have not just one, but we have two Forest Reading authors joining us today. First up, we have Colleen Nelson. Colleen is up for her wonderful book, The Umbrella House. Colleen is no stranger to the Forest Reading program, having won last year with the Undercover book list, which I have here. Also, she's graced our audience with her wonderful books about Harvey the dog, which I believe earned you a Governor General's Award. Or sorry, a
Only a
finalist.
nomination, Steve.
Finalist, sorry. And then I know Red Maple a few years back, you had the book Sadia. But most important of all, Colleen is the dog mom of a wonderful terrier named Rosie. And we also have Michelle Kadarusman. Michelle is up this year for her book, Barani. Michelle is no stranger to us as well, because a couple of years back, she was up for Music for Tigers, and also not that long ago, Theory of Hummingbirds, you were up for, I think it was Silver Birch, is that right? And Music for Tigers was also a finalist for Governor General's Award, I believe. Michelle has lived in Indonesia, Australia, and the very exotic metropolis of Toronto, Ontario. Colleen and Michelle, it's all yours.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. So I am in Winnipeg. Michelle will tell you when she comes on where she is, but it is not Winnipeg and it is not winter. Well, it is technically winter. It's just not snowy winter. So I'm super happy to be here. I'm going to share my screen so that I can give you a little taste of what the Umbrella House is all about. And I did my presentation in front of my students because I am a grade 7-8 teacher in Winnipeg, and I wanted them to see what it was about and to test it out. So I just want to make sure that I told them I want to make sure that it was all good, and they gave it the big thumbs up. And let me tell you, it can be hard to impress a bunch of grade 7-8s. All right. My book, The Umbrella House. It should be sharing. There we go. So this book, I'm not going to lie, this book almost didn't get finished. I really got stuck at one part and used to have two perspectives in it, but my editor suggested that I switch it. So Roxy ended up being the main character. Her name changed. There were all kinds of hiccups with this book. So to know that it made it onto the Silver Birch Award list was a huge honor, of course, and it was really gratifying. So away we go. I always like to explain a little bit about how I became a writer. I think it's important that you know that honestly, anybody can become a writer. Writing is about being dedicated and determined and having passion to continue with a work. So I always say that it started when I had my son James because I was at home on my maternity leave. I had been teaching grade 7-8. And when I was at home, I started to wonder if I might like to write picture books. I soon found out that picture books are super hard to write. And I switched to trying to write the first chapter of a young adult novel for a writing class. And as soon as I started working on it, it just felt like really fun. And I wanted to keep going on it. So every night when I would put James to bed, I would keep working on my book. And eventually I finished it, but then I didn't know what to do with it. So I remembered my grandpa, and that's him in this picture when he's reading to me when I was a little kid. My grandpa had also always wanted to be a writer. However, he didn't get his book published until he was much older than I was. He had already retired and had lots of grandkids. And I remember thinking when he got his book, it was in a box and he had all this over and he opened it. And he was so excited and he gave each of us a copy of his book. And like that feeling, I wanted to know what that felt like. So that's when I started to send my first book out to publishers and eventually it got accepted. So since then, I have done a lot more writing. I've also gotten a lot faster. That first book took many years. But you can see from the list, there's all kinds of books that I've written for all different ages. And the book that took the longest I'll give you a second to see if you can guess what it might have been, but it was actually the picture book. So that book took 5 years to write because I kept coming back to it until finally I got it right and it got published. So picture book authors are amazing. Another question that a lot of people want to know is where does a writer find inspiration? So really, the answer is everywhere. This page has a few of the things that have inspired some of my books. Down at the bottom, that is a school in New York that I used to volunteer at when I lived there. And that didn't inspire the Umbrella House, but it did inspire my very first book. We've also got some kids who are at the Kids Lit Quiz, which was a thing in Ontario. Then it wasn't a thing, and now I think it's back again. So if you're part of the Kids Lit Quiz, then you'll know in Undercover Book List that contest plays a really big role. When I heard about it, I knew I had to include it somewhere in one of my books. And then, as Mr. Steves mentioned, my dog Rosie, she is kind of the inspiration behind the Harvey books. The girls at the top, they inspired my book Sadia, which was a Red Maple nominee a few years ago. And then, of course, every writer in Canada to be nominated for a forest is a huge deal. But then when you win, that is the best day ever. So I'm not going to lie. There's a YouTube video of my book, Undercover Book List, being announced as the winner and all the screaming. And I'll bet you I have watched it like 100 times. So that just, if I'm having a bad writing day, I can watch that video and I can remind myself that to hear kids screaming like you're Taylor Swift is pretty much the best feeling ever. So I want to talk a little bit about what inspired the Umbrella House. It is set in New York City and in a specific neighborhood called the East Village. So I really didn't start out writing a book about the Umbrella House. What I started out wanting to do was write a book about a building that had a garden on the roof. And I knew I wanted it to be in New York, but I didn't really know the neighborhood. So I was doing some investigation and I came across the story about these people who got together and they changed the roof of their building into this gorgeous garden. As I did some more investigating, I found out there was a really interesting story that went along with that particular roof garden. So all of a sudden, instead of writing a book that was just about any old building, I was really focused on just this one building, which is called Umbrella House. And that's what it looks like. The reason there are umbrellas going all the way up the fire escape is, and I'm going to give you a little bit of history now. So as you might know, New York is a very expensive city to live in. And it's also expensive to own property in because there's taxes. So property owners who cannot afford to pay their taxes would sometimes close up their buildings. They would go so far as to cut holes in the roof, they would fill the pipes with cement, and they would block off the doors. And the reason they did that is they didn't want people sneaking in and staying there illegally. However, because it cost so much money to live there, people did it anyway. And they used to smash through the doors or break through the windows, and then they would live in the building. They were called squatters, which means you're living there illegally. At the Umbrella House, because there were the holes in the roof, people used to walk around with umbrellas when it rained so they wouldn't get wet. And the name stuck. People would know that they were living at Umbrella House. So they started to decorate umbrellas and hang them off of the fire escape. That to me was writer gold. Like, how could I not write a story about this? And really quickly, I had in my mind the two characters that lived there, two kids. So we've got Roxy and we have Scout. And it's the story of what happens to them in just their life, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, at Umbrella House in the East Village of New York City. So these are some historical pictures that show what the Umbrella House looked like before it was changed, because over time, the building became fixed up by the people who lived there. But at the time, it was still illegal. So that's why there used to be protests to allow them to stay in the building. Eventually, they went to court, and because they had done so much work fixing up the property, they were allowed to own it. And that's currently how the Umbrella House, the residents now, they all own their apartments. So this is the New York, if you are not familiar with New York, I lived up, will my mouse work? I lived up like in Midtown, so in the 50s, okay, close to Central Park. And the East Village is this area down here. So in New York, the East Village is known as like being a very artsy and eclectic area. And part of that made it really fun to write about because I could create characters that were kind of quirky and different, but they all work together to become a community in the neighborhood that they live in. I always like to find pictures of my characters so that I have a reference point of what they look like on the page. So I knew I wanted to have Roxy be sort of a more spunky character, and she has a dream that she wants to be a reporter one day. She and Scout work on a YouTube channel that's called Evil Kids, so East Village Kids, and they interview people in their neighborhood and they find little stories that they think their viewers would like. So she already has this passion, and she finds out that there's a contest and she and Scout could enter, and then she would have her chance to meet her idol, whose name is Evelyn Pauls. Fun fact, as I told you, I'm a teacher, and I did a contest at school, and kids could enter to have their name in a book. And the real Evelyn Pauls was in grade 6 at the time, and she's now in my class in grade 7, and she won the contest, and that is why her name is in the book. The reporter had a totally different name until like right before the deadline, and then we changed it so that Evelyn could have that character. And then she also has her sidekick, Scout. So Scout lives in the same building, and he is a very talented photographer. When we kind of meet Scout, he is just finding out about a contest that he could, a special school that he could go to so he could study photography. And it's tricky because he really wants to be there for Roxy, but he also really wants to follow his own passion. So he has a little bit of a side story going on. And then you have to have the bad guy. And the bad guy in this case is named Richard Van Newell. So we get more into the plot because Richard Van Newell is trying to buy up the buildings that are in the East Village because he wants to knock them down and build them into luxury condominiums, which is a big problem because that means that Roxy and Scout will have nowhere to live. But it also creates a problem because it changes the neighborhood, and that's called gentrification. So he wants to take these apartment buildings where people can live reasonably and build buildings that are going to cost millions for the people to live in. That's going to change who can live there because it's going to make an environment where it's a lot of very wealthy people, and they might not want to support the local arts communities and all the other things that are going on in the East Village. There is a bit of a mystery in this book too, because Roxy and Scout discover something as they are trying to figure out how they're going to save their apartment. If you have ever heard of the street artist named Banksy, he kind of inspired what I wanted to do. And there is a graffiti artist named the Midnight Muralist who hasn't been displaying any work lately, but Roxy and Scout come across something that helps them get an idea of who the Midnight Muralist might be. And they also get the idea that maybe that person could help them with their building. So you have to read the book to find out who the Midnight Muralist is. But I will tell you this, I did not even know who the Midnight Muralist was. I remember the day I was writing the scene and literally I typed the person's name and I sat back and I looked at the computer and I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know that. That just happened. I am not good at planning my plot, obviously. So it was a big surprise for me too, but it totally worked. And I'm glad that I went with it. Sometimes you get the best surprises by not planning. And I'll be interested to hear when Michelle talks, if she is a planner or a plotter. I mean, a pantser or a plotter, Michelle. So whenever an author writes, there's always some big ideas that they want to explore. And these were the ones that I was thinking of as I was writing the book. And you can see the mural behind. When you're in the East Village, that you see art all over the place, and there is a sense of community because people are collaborating together. They're supporting the local businesses. You don't see a lot of chain stores. You see like mom and pop stores where people have owned it for generations, or they're starting out and trying something new. And I find that a really inspiring neighborhood. That's the kind of place that I want to hang out at. I don't know Toronto super well, but I'm sure you have neighborhoods like that in Toronto as well. So last May, before I came to the forest, I was actually in New York, and these were some of the pictures I took in the East Village, just to show that it's really cool that there's so much art just created everywhere, whether it's a tree stump or a mural on a building or an empty field that somebody has created art to put in. And again, I did mention gentrification. So this is a issue that's affecting a lot of cities, including Toronto. And our cities thrive because we have a diverse mixture of people who live there. And when you start making buildings and apartments too expensive for lots of our population, then you have to look at your city and it starts to really change. So this is something that is an issue in lots of places, and it was something I wanted to explore in Umbrella House. I get so many compliments on the cover, and it is gorgeous, and I wish I could take credit for it, but I cannot because it was Miss Peggy Collins who created the cover, and she just did the most amazing job. It's so exciting. Authors we don't really get a say in what our cover looks like. We can suggest ideas, but because Peggy is an author illustrator herself, she read the book and then she just ran with it, and she created something that is a true work of art. And I'm so proud to call my book. All right, that takes me to the very end of my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing, and we are going to get to hear from Michelle about her amazing book, Barani. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Colleen. That was an amazing presentation. I
Oh,
enjoyed
thank
it
you.
so much. And I learned some things as a writer as well. I love the idea of you choosing a character, like an image of a character. I'm going to use that. I'm going to steal that from you because it's such a great idea. I always hold so much in my head, including the image of the character.
Yeah.
But hey, I might try that technique. And listening to your presentation, I see so many parallels between our two books, which maybe we'll discuss at the end of my much shorter presentation, I think. But here I
Okay,
go.
I was worried I was blabbing on. I was in teacher mode.
No, I was enthralled. I was.
You were
And I have to
enthralled.
say,
Oh, thank
I
you,
was.
Michelle.
And New York City is one of my favorite cities in the world. And reading Umbrella House, it really evoked the city so well. So beautifully, the sights and sounds, and you really felt like you were spending time in New York City.
Maybe we
And
should do
that's
an
not an
author
easy thing
tour
to do.
there. We should do an author tour there, Michelle.
Oh yeah, let's do that.
Okay, I can't wait to hear from you.
All right, I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, thank you so much. So we're going to talk a little bit about my book called Barani. And just like Colleen's beautiful illustration for The Umbrella House, Barani cover was also illustrated by Peggy Collins. So that's just one of the similarities between the two books that we can talk about later. But we're both very lucky that we had Peggy Collins to illustrate the cover of our books, because Colleen and I, we both publish with the same publisher, Pajama Press. So we're super lucky because they make beautiful, beautiful books. So Barani is set not in Canada, as you can probably guess, also not in Australia, which is where I am right now, and which is one of my original homelands as well, but in my other original homeland, which is Indonesia. So my father is Indonesian, and growing up, I spent many visits there, but then I lived there throughout all of my 20s. And it was during this time when I was living there as a younger person that I had an experience that always stayed with me and was the was the inspiration behind writing Barani. So when I was living there, I was living in a place called Surabaya, which you can see on the map here. Surabaya is in East Java. And my brother, he was there as well. And he went to a small restaurant. And in Indonesia, we call a small restaurant a warung. And he was in this warung, and he saw there an orangutan who was being held in a cage. And she was there as an attraction for the restaurant. And this, of course, upset him a lot. You know, we know that animals like orangutans should not be pets, should not be kept in cages. So we did all we could to liberate her. And but the story and the imagery really stayed with me for all of those years. And it wasn't until I started reading about sort of what current issues are happening in Surabaya and Indonesia, and the activism in the country, that I started to really think about how I could turn this into a story for middle grade. And I'll talk about that activism in a little minute. But first, I thought I'd take you on a little journey to set the stage for you in Indonesia. Some quick facts about Indonesia. It's the 4th largest population in the world. It has, around 264 million people. So that is a lot of people. And within that large population, there are literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, over 600 different ethnic groups in the country. So when I say different ethnic groups, I mean different languages, different kinds of food, different cultures. They all exist in this country, which is an archipelago. And an archipelago means it's a country made up of many, many different islands. So Indonesia is the largest archipelago in the world, and it's about over 17,000 islands make up the country of Indonesia. So the book Berani is set in two main different locations, quite different from each other. The first one is Surabaya, which is where I was living when I had the experience with the orangutan. And Surabaya is the 2nd largest city in Indonesia, the largest city being the capital of Jakarta. Surabaya is a thriving metropolis. It's a densely populated city, and there's all kinds of different socioeconomic groups living in Surabaya. And one of the main characters, Malia, she lives in Surabaya with her mother. And Malia is from quite a privileged background in Indonesia. She's attending a private school. Her mother is Canadian, and her father was Indonesian, but he has recently sadly passed away. So her Canadian mother wants to take Malia back to Toronto, which is her original home. And Malia has very strong feelings about wanting to stay in Indonesia at the beginning of the book. So Surabaya is a city urban setting for one character, Malia. And the second character, Ari, is from a smaller town. It's not quite a village. It's a smaller town, the town of Malang. And Malang is actually the place where my brother did originally see the orangutan who inspired the story. So Malang is about an hour from Surabaya, and Ari lives in his father's restaurant. And the restaurant specialty is sup buntut, which is oxtail soup. I know it probably doesn't sound that delicious when you explain what it means, but I guarantee to you it is very delicious, and it's a real specialty of the area. And Ari is living with his uncle in his uncle's restaurant because his family are rice farmers. So there's no middle school in the village where his family are rice farmers. So he's able to live with his uncle in his uncle's restaurant and attend the local middle school. So Ari is from a less privileged background than Malia. although, you know, he's attending school, and he's very grateful to his uncle that he has a place to stay, and he has to help his uncle around the restaurant. And one of the chores is attending to Ginger Juice, who is, like the original story, has an orangutan as a pet attraction in the restaurant. So here is an image of an orangutan, and this could be Ginger Juice, who is the third character in the story. And sadly, Ginger Juice is in the cage, and we do hear her point of view of what it's like to be held in a cage. And so Malia and Ari, even though they come from very different backgrounds, they live in different cities, they come together in Barani to help liberate Ginger Juice. Quick facts about orangutans. They're only found in Indonesia and Malaysia. Orangutans are the only apes found outside of Africa. They're known to be incredibly gentle. They're quite solo, and they're known to be very gentle. They're also highly intelligent. The very sad thing is they're also critically endangered, which you would know to mean that there's very few population of orangutans in the wild, sadly left in the world. And that is mainly due to this monoculture called palm oil. Now, we find palm oil in almost everything. It's a very inexpensive oil that's used from everything from ice cream to lipsticks. And farmers in Indonesia know that if they plant a palm oil plantation, that they will be able to make some good money. And so sadly, that is what's happened over these last decades. More and more of the orangutan's natural habitat, which is this, as you see, this is this rainforest, is turned into palm oil plantations. Now, in this rainforest here, there's incredible biodiversity. There is thousands and thousands of different animal species, but also different kinds of biodiversity, different plant life. When we turn it into a monoculture, like any single product, like rice farming or palm oil, we completely obliterate all of that important biodiversity that we need in the world. And not only do we need it, but of course, all the animals, like the orangutans, who this is their home, they suddenly don't have a home anymore. So it is from losing the habitat that orangutans have become endangered. Many orangutans are orphaned because they're because of poaching as well. And sadly, it's still a practice that baby orangutans are available to keep as pets. And of course, they're not pets, they are wild creatures. So the palm oil industry is a very complex issue. And I was very hesitant to weave it into a story because it can be very easy to fall into the trap of thinking palm oil farmers are bad, and you know, we need to stop using palm oil to save the orangutans. It's much more complex than that. You know, there's education, and there's also poverty in Indonesia that needs to be improved to understand that we need to hold on to these original habitats. But if you're a farmer who doesn't have much money and you need to feed your family, well, and this is something that can provide that for you, that's a very hard decision. So I try to introduce some of these complex issues within Barani. Activism is a large component of Barani. It is through Malia's activism about wanting to save the orangutans that bring her and Ari together and help to liberate Ginger Juice. So I hope that you have a chance to read it and tell me what you think. And maybe share your passions of activism. I know, activism has to start with a passion, and I think we all have those within us, that things that how we want to change things in the world. And we all have a voice, and we all have that ability to speak up. And when we join with others, it can be very, very powerful. And it was me reading about current youth activists, not much older, about the same age as our middle grade readers, that have been embarking upon all kinds of methods of activism to help save these natural rainforests and help the endangered species of orangutans. And I was really inspired by some of this youth activism in the region. That's really what propelled me to want to put all this information and that past memory into the story of Barani. So this is some of my other books. Music for Tigers has been gratefully on the Silver Birch list before, and We the Sea Turtles is my newest short story collection, and that also deals with lots of themes of biodiversity and the environment. So I think that's it for now. I'm dying to sort of go back and chat with Colleen, so I'm going to stop sharing and welcome Colleen back.
Well, hello.
Hello.
That was awesome. So in my classroom, Berani is a big favorite. Actually, in all of our six classes love it too. And I gave it to one boy, and he gave it back to me, and he sort of had a sheepish look on his face. And I said, "What is it, Hans?" And he wouldn't say. And I'm like, "Did you cry?" And he went. He was kind of embarrassed. I'm like, I cry all the time. I cried in Barani. I know what you mean. So I feel like when you, as a reader, when you connect with a book and it moves you to cry or laugh or have any kind of big emotion, that's like the best part about reading. So thank you, Michelle, because your book's
Can
awesome.
I ask, Michelle, when you wrote it, did you cry?
I did.
How can you not? Yeah.
And thank you, Colleen, because as you know, as a writer, that is the greatest compliment, that you can move readers with emotion in your writing. So thank you for sharing that. That's beautiful.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I was wondering, first of all, thank you, both of you, for such great presentation and background into your stories. And Michelle led us nicely into the whole thing around social activism. So I thought, why don't we start with a hard question? Both of your books not only have the same illustrator, the same publisher and everything, they both take on fairly tough issues: homelessness with Umbrella House, and animal captivity with Barani. And I noticed that in both of the books that you have children engaging in various artistic ways. So whether it's visual art, or it's writing, or it's protests, and that kind of thing. So, and to add to that, I really like when Michelle was saying that she didn't want just the good guy and the bad guy and so on, that a lot of these are very complex issues. So like how do you do that as a writer? How do you use something like art, make something entertaining, make something that will make someone cry, but at the same rate find a way to balance the complexities of that?
Yeah,
Colleen,
it's
you want to start?
tricky.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. And it is tricky because, and in Umbrella House, I kind of show both sides of gentrification, because when the contest there's like top three. So you see what somebody else's take on it is, because it isn't all bad. Some of the buildings do need to be torn down, and there does need to be new builds put up. But I think looking at it from a young person's perspective, where they're curious and they want to do something to make a difference, I think any way that you can kind of navigate between those two things, so that as a young reader, you're seeing that the world is not black and white, and you cannot control everything that's going on, but you can do something so that you know that you're contributing. And the passion that young people come in that's really inspiring to adults usually.
Yes, there is hope, I think. Michelle, do you want to comment on that?
I just want to say that, one of the reasons why I love writing middle grade stories is because, middle grade readers, this is the time when we know that we can change the world. We're so positive in our outlook. We're we're really willing to look outwardly and see where we can make changes. And that to me is really inspiring. It's a very positive, idealistic view, but I thought we sadly do lose that as we become older. And that's what I really love about this age group and these characters that we can write about, is that, these are the world changers, the future world changers. And to be inspired and to know that your voice can make a difference, I think is really important.
Thank you, both of you. I wanted to get you to say a little bit more about your writing process. We have a lot of young authors aspiring authors with us watching. And Colleen, I know you said you're a pantser, you kind of wing it, but you didn't. You did all kinds of research. You're looking into the history behind the building and looking into the different issues. Michelle, you were clearly writing. I was going to ask you about how autobiographical the story is. You're clearly writing from past experience. So I was wondering if you wanted to comment a bit about that, how you approach a story, and like, how do you find the time to write, or whatever tips you might have for some of our young aspiring writers out there? Michelle, did you want to go first?
Sure. Well, this sounds silly, but when people ask me these questions, even though I've written many books, I always feel like answering, I don't know, because every project to me is so unique, and I do approach it in different ways. And I guess that's my default, is I don't know, because I find different entry points into different subject matters that I'm passionate about. But everything always for me has to start from something I'm truly inspired about, wanting to understand more, wanting to learn more about, really wanting to deep dive into the issues, the subject, the context, and how we feel about it. I mean, most of my stories are usually about the environment and the human themes that are connected together and how we interact with our natural environment. And that for me is a constant form of inspiration. So I usually will start with something I'm really interested in reading about. So research then is very easy. I like to read and watch things and gather as much information as I can about the subject. And then I tend to hold it all in my head for a long time. I go on these long nature walks and I muddle it out sort of mentally before I sit down at the computer, after I've probably been reading about something and thinking about it for over a year or more, I would say. And then I start to think about how I can sort of do this magical alchemy of taking it from the air and putting it somehow in the computer. And when you do that, it's never as good, as it feels up there than what it appears on your computer. So that's the difficult. That's when it starts to get hard. But I, like Colleen, I'll try out, using different points of view, from different characters, and it's a lot of playing around for me of what instinctually feels right. And I think as a writer, that's a really important thing, is to trust your own voice, because there's no new real stories, but it's how you are individually using your voice to write them. And to all the young aspiring writers out there, I would say really trust that your voice is unique. All of your classmates, you could all write the same story, but it's not going to be the same story, because you're going to have a different viewpoint, a different way of seeing it. So then I really try to trust my instincts, and that's really what leads me. But in answer to Colleen's earlier question, I am definitely a pantser, not a plotter.
Okay,
Thank you.
but here's the truth. So at Christmas, over the holiday break, I decided I was actually going to plot out a book, and it's way easier, Michelle. We really have to do this more often. But it's not as much fun, because when you know what you're going to write, it's like, okay, I know I have to write this chapter now. I like the fun of not really knowing every detail of the story until it magically comes out. I also think that reading a lot will help you to become a good writer. And I know right now my students are working on their short stories, and I always tease them that I'm going to steal them. So they started copywriting them and go, I'm not joking. They go on Creative Commons and they copyright their work so that should I ever decide to steal it, they have legal evidence that I got the original writer.
It's going to be a different story, however you go. Michelle, I have to ask you how you did such a good job writing from Ginger Juice's perspective. I know, especially with middle grade people that are the kids that are writing, a lot of times you'll have animal characters or fantasy type characters. How is it that you make an animal character sound so realistic and yet so moving?
Thank you for saying that it was. It was, I think creatively, the biggest challenge I've had was to write the point of view from Ginger Juice. And, you know, in all of my research that I was doing into trying to find out about what the I guess the mental state of an orangutan would be, having been held in captivity, all the experts in the field kept on just saying to me, well, no different to how a human being would feel. You know, we're so similar that you can really just imagine how you would feel living in a cage. So while that it breaks your heart to sort of continue to get that information, as a writer, it allowed me to sort of access how I thought I could speak for her. And I think it was a bit of a, I guess, a bit of a risk to sort of give her a voice rather than using third person. And I think I felt most passionate about doing that because of the situation of the orangutan that, you know, that inspired the whole story. That, you know, really allowing, giving her freedom, I suppose, and it allowed me to understand what might have transpired more. I guess it allowed me to have a deeper understanding of her, to approach it that way. But I had a lot of help actually from my editor. You know, we played around with a lot of different kinds of styles of writing for her voice. And so I can't take complete credit at all. I had such help from publisher and from my editor. Yeah, I don't know if I'll do it again. I don't know if I would do, but you know, it was moving for me as well to be able to sort of deep dive that way.
Mm-hmm. And Colleen, maybe you can add too. I know well, there's a dog in Umbrella House, but the main characters aren't animals. But how you go about developing characters for books?
Yeah, and
She had the
honestly, I don't
picture,
think
I remember. Yeah.
the yeah, that's right. I don't think the characters really come alive on a first draft. For me, the first draft is just getting the ideas out, and it's like discovering a new friend and if with each revision, I kind of fine tune who this person is and really think about what's their backstory, what's contributed to who they are, because just like real humans, it's not what you see right now that made me who I am. It's my family and my background and my work. All of those things make somebody, give them their identity. So that's why revision is actually a lot of fun. I don't know about Michelle. I love editing and going back in and muddling through and trying to tease out who these characters actually are. And honestly, like I said, Umbrella House was a really hard book to write. And I wouldn't say necessarily that the characters changed, but cutting out a whole storyline for Scout, that really changed sort of I want to say trajectory, but I'm not sure if that's the right word. It kind of changed like the main thrust of the book and keeping it just focused on Roxy's story. So lots of times I'll think about specific people in my life and try and imagine what they would do in certain situations. But you always have to stay true to who your character is. Like, would they behave a certain way based on their lived experiences? So that's what that's, I think, what makes a really well-rounded character.
Of course, any of the students you teach or your family, they're thinking, "Was that me?" Is that...
Yeah. Oh, trust me, they're in there. Let me tell you.
I really like how both of you have kind of given this idea that you don't have this sort of perfect image in your mind of what the story is going to be. And even to the point where, Colleen, I know you mentioned at one point, I won't give it away, who the mystery artist is, right? And you didn't even really know until you're writing and getting to a certain point. So it's okay if you don't know. You just have to get out and start writing. I can't let you go.
Except if you're my student, then you do have to know the ending, because I do not want to read 6,000 words of you meandering through, but
Well,
every
there's,
other
yeah,
student can write
that's
whatever they
okay.
want.
It's just the first draft. It's okay. Yeah, I can't let you go without asking you about any future projects. I already know there's a New York tour coming up between the two of you. What else is in your near future?
Oh, it's so tricky to say those things because you just don't know what publishing is. A tricky business. You never know. I think I might have something coming out in the fall that I haven't even talked to Michelle about, but I'm not like, I don't want to say anything until I know 100%.
Fair
I'll let
enough.
Michelle, maybe she has some official exciting news she can share.
Nothing official at all, but we're going to have a conversation
Yeah.
offline, Colleen, about what's coming out in the fall. I'm currently in research mode for a new novel, and it's going to be again set in Indonesia, but it's historical fiction. It's set during the Dutch colonization of Indonesia, so in the late 1800s. And this is something very new for me. I have not done historical fiction before, so I've been doing lots and lots of research and really enjoying, again, like diving into that subject. So I don't think it'll be out for quite a number of years yet.
It's okay. It's something to look forward to. Um, I could talk all day with you, but we should wrap things up. Excuse me. I do want to thank both Colleen and Michelle for coming and sharing with us today about their two books, Umbrella House and Barani. I also want to thank the staff at Forest of Reading for making all of this possible. Before you go, one, you need to watch future Forest Fridays coming up. Keep watching on the Forest of Reading website. Two, you need to come to the Forest of Reading Festival, which will be at the Harbourfront in Toronto, May 14th to the 15th. Or if you miss it, you can watch it virtually on the 16th, after the 16th. Three, if you are a teacher, please visit the Forest of Reading website for all the fantastic resources that volunteers have put together for each of the books. And four, and most important, everyone out there, keep on reading, and don't forget to vote the end of April for your favorite book. Will it be this one? Will it be this one? I don't know. And there's, of course, 8 other wonderful books out there that you
Yeah.
can pick from. I do want to thank you for joining us for this Forest Fridays. Thank you.
Thank you so much for
Thanks
great
so
questions.
much.
Bye, Michelle. Bye, James.
Bye.
Bye.